Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday, December 7, 2022 Lower Merion Board of Commissioner meetings. You guys don't need to hear from me at all, so I'm going to pass this right on to Commissioner Josh Grimes, who heads our Building and Planning Committee. Commissioner Grimes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. 8 items on the agenda for Building and Planning today. Tonight, we will start with the authorization to release funds held in escrow. There are 4 items. Are there any commissioners who would like any of these considered separately? Seeing none, I will make the motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval to release funds held in escrow as improvement guarantees in accordance with Section 135-5 of the Township Code for the following: 525 Clothier Road, Lot Number 2, escrow release Number 1 for $36,250. 525 Clothier Road, Lot Number 1, escrow release Number 1 for $34,760. 223 North Highland Avenue, Coahuila Yeshiva High School, escrow release Number 5 for $19,440. And 23 City Avenue, Fenton International School, escrow release Number 3 for $3,000. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. Before we take comment, I just want to make sure, because as I read this, the first 2 items seem to be for the same address. So I just want to make sure that's correct. I don't know if there's anyone here who can answer that question right now.
I can,
yes,
just because I know.
Yes.
On Clothier Lane, there was we actually approved a subdivision of an existing parcel. There's a dilapidated house that was
got it. Okay.
torn down, and now there are 2 houses on separate properties still.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Commissioner Whalen. Okay, are there any commissioner questions or comments on any of these? Seeing none, or any public comment? Seeing none, I will move for a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3. Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? President Sinai abstains.
What's in here?
Okay, do you mind if this goes on the consent calendar?
Please put on consent.
Thank you very much, President Sinai. So that passes. Moving on, next is we have certificates of appropriateness on page 13 of the final packet. There are 2 of them here because we have a brief staff presentation on 47 West Lancaster. We'll take these individually. Let me just put something on the table. I will move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval of a certificate of appropriateness for 47 West Lancaster Avenue, Ardmore Commercial District, 22-25. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Just a moment, I'll share my screen and bring up a few slides to go over this project. So this is 47 West Lancaster Avenue. This is the property which on the Lancaster Avenue frontage has a Trek bike store. And the building extends way to the back, almost all the way back toward the railroad. The recommendation from HARB was to approve the application to reduce the rear depth of the building by about 14 feet and to construct 2 additional stories on the remaining rear portion to contain 5 apartment units with details and revisions to be reviewed by a subcommittee of the HARB. Here's another view, aerial view, showing that the depth of the building from a different angle. The front of the building showing that Trek storefront. And this is the rear section from the parking lot. Above is the west elevation, below the east elevation. It contains a portion of that Trek store, the retail store use. And the rear of the building is a currently vacant former restaurant. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, there is a very tight drive aisle connecting the 2 sections of the township public parking lot directly behind this building. With that in mind, we worked with the applicant, the new owner of this building, as part of this project to reduce the size of the building to create a wider drive aisle in this location. So these drawings represent the current conditions on the left with just barely 2 lanes for traffic. and a revised design which shows the 2 lanes as well as room for a parallel parking lane along the railroad fence, a 5-foot sidewalk, and then 2.5 feet for plantings before the back wall of that building. Another aspect of the project involves the enclosure of the dumpsters that serve the various businesses fronting Lancaster Avenue there. Those dumpsters are found on the township property, the township lot, but the owner of the building wants their new residents to have a nicer view, so they have offered to provide enclosures for the dumpsters, and we propose that as a condition of approval for this application. Here is a site plan showing the footprint of the entire building, and I'll zoom in on the rear portion. So the red box outlined here shows the 14-foot depth that's being removed from the back of the building, and the new revised drive aisle, sidewalk, and parallel parking spaces. In terms of elevations, this is the current west elevation of the new building. Again, 3 stories to contain 5 apartment units. Here's the east elevation. This is facing the new train platform. And then the north elevation and south elevation, which is what faces Lancaster Avenue. Now this south elevation will be set back quite a distance from the front facade along Lancaster Avenue, so the visibility of that upward extension will not be very visible, we think, from Lancaster Avenue or any public sidewalks. And this is an older elevation, but it shows the design in color, so you can get a feel for the material selection. HARB wanted a couple of details to be revised. They didn't think it warranted being held up any further, but the HARB subcommittee will be reviewing a few items, including the placement of dryer vents, air intake vents, some of the things that come later in the design process. They just want to make sure the final locations of elements like that are harmonious with the overall design. And we have recommended 3 conditions of approval for this, which I understand the applicant is in agreement with. First of all, number 1 is that the applicant shall provide for public access over that rear of the property. So the property boundary will not be changing. Currently, the rear property line is the back wall of that building. So even though that back wall will be reduced, they will still own that chunk, that 14-foot chunk of the property, which will become drive aisle. So we will need to obtain an easement from the new building owner for that area being used. Number 2 is that the applicant shall be responsible for improvements to the area at the rear of the property, including surfacing the drive aisle, demarcating parallel parking spaces, and installing curbing, sidewalk, and plantings as shown on the approved plan. And the 3rd involves the creation of those dumpster enclosures on the township lot. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, so I'm actually going to start. It is a little unusual for an applicant to propose something where they're reducing the size of a building. Is that their choice? Is that something the township asked for?
Well, we did ask for it because we saw the need to, or the desire to increase that drive aisle size, but the applicant's original proposal was for a 2-story total building there. With the reduction of that, they were able to add a 3rd story and actually increase the number of units, I believe, by 1 or 2.
Okay, thanks. Other commissioner questions or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Courtney.
Thanks, Commissioner Grimes. My question is, why is this going through this process instead of land development?
That's something I think Chris can address.
It's really a building addition, and the additional pieces that are in the parking lot are voluntarily being coordinated by the applicant to the township. So originally what they came in was just to add on to the building itself, which isn't land development. You don't, for a building addition, that's not required. As we were having the conversation, and I really want to give a lot of the credit to Jillian Dirks, who's here with us tonight, doing this through economic development, was having the conversations with the applicant to say, we can make this better. Okay. A couple years ago, the board saw a new apartment building constructed over in Ballkinwood, behind the Ballkinwood Shopping Center. Everybody said, why would anybody want to live in the back of a shopping center? Well, this was the same sort of situation. Why would anybody want to live in this area? You know, why would anybody want to live back there? And we pointed out many of the concerns to deal with circulation from cars, circulations for pedestrians, especially now with that parking lot being the Amtrak station. That's the major access through there. We wound up having, I think, a very lively, good dialogue with the applicant and pushing them to try to get those necessary township improvements that we wouldn't be able to get any other way. And so they're voluntarily giving the township and making those improvements, giving us land, making the improvements, and maintaining all of that. And then it's just really just a building. The rest of it is just a building addition, so it's not really land development. And in this, I would say, if it was land development, we'd be getting everything that we would be required to get out of land development.
Okay. I'm trying to remember from 3 years ago. Isn't there a threshold at which if you change the building, like 75%, that you have to go through land development, it's considered reconstruction? So this is pretty significant. You're reducing the depth by 14 feet, and then you're putting 2 more stories on top of the back, right? So does this not cross that
That's not
threshold?
actually the definition of land development. This met the definition of a building expansion, not land development. Land development was commercial or non-development. It's not going outside the footprint other than what we're requiring the applicant to do because of their voluntary contribution, and I don't think that's fair to penalize an applicant for giving the township land and then having them go through the land development process. So we wanted to treat it, and they were pretty much at the stage in our conversation. The applicant didn't want to go through land development. I mean, our land development process is expensive, it's onerous, and there's a lot of things that could come out of that. They would have scaled back the project to avoid that, and here was a way that we were able to get we tried to get a win-win. We tried to get something that benefited this, and it became a good project. It had circulation in it, the sidewalks in it, there's some greening around it, even this ability to clean up those dumpsters in there. If anybody's walked back there and driven back, we kind of wonder, how did all those dumpsters get back on township land? Then we started asking the questions. We started to talk to different property owners. They're just there. Like, there isn't an agreement between the property owners. It's a convenience from the township to those property owners to do that, but they've sprawled over time. And when we started to look at this, we've de-siloed, we've worked with the parking services department, and we think we're actually picking up 5 or 6 new parking spaces in that parking lot. So the overwhelming benefits to this, we thought, really outweighed any of that, and it really is just a building expansion.
Is this a TC2 or a TC1?
This is TC1.
Okay. So could any building along this stretch, if all they're doing is increasing the height up to the allowable limit,
Yeah,
they could do that without going through land development?
it's just a building permit.
Okay.
You'll see additions, if you walk along from the township building and you cut over to the train station now, you'll see there's been a couple additions back by the Ardmore Music Hall. Those were just building, they didn't come through for land development, those were just building additions.
Okay, thanks for explaining it, appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Vice President Gavin?
Thank you very much, Commissioner Grimes. Greg, can you go to the slide showing the drive aisle? Because you had talked about, I think this plan makes sense and is great. I'm a little concerned. You showed how narrow that was, and you kind of indicated with your voice a little bit how narrow it was when you went through it. As I'm looking through the pictures, that changes from 9.5 feet to 10 feet per each way. So it's, I guess the drive aisle is an extra foot, which still seems pretty narrow, especially if you're parking a car right up against the fence. We are assuming, and I'm looking at the picture, that this car is parked very nicely up against the fence. I've seen people park, and they don't always park, inches from the side, especially if there's no way for the passenger to get out. Why are we allowing a parking spot in a very narrow drive aisle back there?
Well, I think Chris can address that one too.
Well, we've been working with the Director of Parking Services, Jerry Adams. And there are township standards. 10 foot is a drive aisle width that was acceptable to parking services, and the width of that parking space was there. He felt that it could do it. Certainly, if parking services gets to the point, and we're finding through use of this that's not a desirable parking space, you would just make it all drive aisle.
Okay, I mean, it may be acceptable, but it sounds like it barely fits.
It is tight, and once again, we have it'll be our property, so we'll have the ability to manage it. If we find that it's too tight and you're seeing trucks or people are going, there gets to be an accident, I think we would change it. But right now, based on our reviews, we don't see that would be an issue. And one of the advantages to having it tight is it makes people go slow.
People are going to go slow regardless. I'm not too worried about people going 60 miles an hour back through the drive aisle back there. I would so that has nothing to do with this plan, right? We can approve this plan and you guys can still.
Correct.
I'd love for you to sit down with Jerry again and reconsider whether that parking spot makes sense, because it does seem incredibly tight if somebody's not parked exactly against the fence.
And that's where we have a lot of flexibility with that striping. This isn't set in stone yet. We have that area, and then with the reconfiguration of the dumpsters, this additional area, I think that whole area could be restriped.
Okay, and everything else sounds great. Thank you.
Sure. Other commissioner questions, comments? Commissioner Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, first of all, the lighting piece, outside lighting, is there a provision there to ensure that there's adequate outside lighting? I know as you go back in that area, I mean, I hang out there a lot, and so when I'm back there, it can get dark sometimes. So, is that a part of a provision that they're putting out about adequate, my concern is that, you have folks who are going to be coming in those apartments, and there's a business area in that back alley back there, but how it looked it didn't look like it had a lighting piece, and I'm assuming it does.
Yeah, so there will be lighting affixed directly to the facades of the building. Details of that hadn't quite been completely figured out yet at this stage. So that's one of the items that the HARB subcommittee decided that they wanted to continue to review.
I just think that that's an important piece particularly how it will be redesigned there. My other piece is asking the question about, and maybe this is for Chris. From my understanding, when the application first came through, that the applicant, help me understand, the applicant's first submission was 1 story for how many apartments?
I believe it was 3 apartments on the existing building footprint.
Which is how many floors?
It's single story, but their proposal was just one additional story above. 1 additional story.
And so why would the township encourage a third piece?
Well, we see an existing challenged parking lot, and the only chance that would ever get to make this would be to purchase that. And we've had conversations, I think, when you look at Ardmore and Ardmore Master Plan, wouldn't it be great to make that a better parking lot? Well, the option is for the township to go buy that building. Well, here was an opportunity to do that without buying that building, and we had conversations with the applicant, and they were trying to use parking, and I think we evolved their design much better from how they were able to do that. The density wasn't necessarily the concern to us. The concern was really the physical improvements to the township, and I think that's what we were looking at in this as we were going forward. It was allowed to fill that volume by code, and you're allowed to have the 3 stories. It was set back from Lancaster Avenue, and the advantage of having pedestrian improvements, the lighting, the additional circulation improvements, the cleaning up of the dumpsters, it just seemed to outweigh all of that as the project got forward.
All right, so listen, I agree. I think that the whole concept here of the widening of the back alley back there, if the applicant is willing to help with the change the aesthetics with the dumpsters, I think that's an important, but I was just trying to get clarification about the height and whether it was initiated by them or from the township.
They always could go there. I mean, it was always within their right. They weren't granted anything. They were just kind of pushing them through that. This is where I think in the economic development thing of what we do, this is kind of, there isn't a magic bullet. All these are these small, you roll up your sleeves, you have conversations back and forth. And I'll commend the applicant for having patience with us. We were throwing ideas that we went into this saying we would like that parking lot to be improved. It's the one chance that we'll get a chance to do that. And especially for anybody who's ever had to walk back there. That is a very challenging thing. I feel, it's not, I would say, I don't usually word it's not safe, but I don't feel comfortable walking back there when you have 2 lines.
probably because you see me better, but that's fine. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Commissioner Whalen?
Yes, just briefly, I don't see from the renderings, is there any outdoor space associated with the apartment building?
There is a very narrow planted area between the sidewalk and the rear wall of the building. And then sidewalk, which currently does not extend around the rear of the building, now will completely encircle that back wall.
Sounds like a very usable outdoor space. I don't know if there's an opportunity here for, I like the design to include porches or a roof deck, or, you're going to have 3 stories going up against a 1-story portion. That's sort of an easy outlet to have an outdoor space that's already set back on that track building. Just to make some kind of generation of outdoor space here, I think would benefit the project, but thank you.
I agree. I think it's a good comment. I would also point out that there is a rec fee that's associated with this type of development. So it's a fee that's paid to the township per unit.
Jillian, can you speak up, please?
Sorry, I just am pointing out that there is also a recreation fee associated with this development. So that is per unit. They would be contributing to our township recreation facilities as a benefit as well for recreation.
Understood, and I appreciate that, but in my experience, those per unit fees and improvement fees usually sit in an account and don't generate what we're hoping them to. And if obviously the applicant can build the building that he or she wants, but if it can be improved with a little bit of outdoor space, even with very minimal change, I think that would promote a lot more than the per unit cost.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Churchill.
Thank you. With this building expansion, do they become subject to stormwater management?
So it's existing non-conforming to those requirements. It would not trigger a stormwater requirement, which is based on the increase of impervious surface.
Yes.
So this is probably actually decreasing the amount of impervious surface because they're adding a limited amount of green where there is currently none.
Well, I assume that this is done, well, non-conforming is probably grandfathered in because it takes up most of the lot area. And am I correct? It's grandfathered in?
Yes.
I would just hope that between now and then we could at least address some kind of minimal stormwater management, or at least explore it. Also, where with these additional units, you have to provide parking. Where is the parking?
So this is also existing non-conforming to parking. They have an existing non-conforming number of spaces based on the previous restaurant use.
Which was what? And where are they?
I would have to.
That restaurant didn't need many spaces.
Refer to the applicant. They don't have, the building doesn't have parking.
And so you're going to increase, what, 5 units, and they're not obligated to provide any parking?
They are not, yes, that was the determination.
And that's because they're non-conforming and grandfathered. Is the entrance of these units going to be on Lancaster Avenue, or?
The entrance will be to the rear, facing towards the existing McDonald's, facing into the township parking lot.
Okay. I'm kind of hazy. A year or two, we passed, I guess, our zoning that any new development had to front the street. It would be Lancaster. And I guess the answer is that they're non-conforming grandfathered so that they don't have to enter through Lancaster?
That's correct.
Boy, I want their building. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Zetlov?
Thanks, Commissioner Grimes. I would just observe that this is a building that, to put it nicely, needs help. It's desperately in need of redevelopment. It's not visible from Lancaster Avenue. It's a plan with many benefits to the township. It's a very good plan. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Any other commissioner questions, comments? I'm sorry. Oh, sure. Yeah, no, Commissioner Stevenson, you're welcome to make some other comments.
I thought there was another piece there. I just wanted to say that I agree with Commissioner Zoloff that the developer brought together a good plan, and I would equally like to say to the staff, the work that they did with this. You know, this is the model that I would talk about when we talk about development. It's small. It fits in with the township, and it works. And I think what the folks have put together here is a good one, particularly in that particular area, and particularly for the staff working with this developer to change the back alley. So I think that you should all be complimented on both sides on that.
Thank you. And, you know, I would also just acknowledge the willingness of the applicant to work with us when we presented them with this idea. I think we thought they would maybe throw up their hands, but they were very willing and accommodating and worked through all of the issues with us. So we were very appreciative.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? I'm looking online also. I don't see anyone. I would just say, I'd echo Commissioner Stevenson's comments, but also say, I think Commissioner Churchill brought up a good point. Legally, they may not have to do parking, but these if it's apartments, these tenants will have to park somewhere, and those township lots, I think, are what, 2 hours? And, you know, so that's not going to work, and I think it would be unhelpful if maybe these people will patronize Trek Cycle Shop and not need parking, which would be great. But otherwise, they're going to have to park in the neighborhood, which it would not be an optimal outcome. So hopefully, if this is something the owner has to work with on, they will do so, although that's outside our power today. Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment? Thank you very much. Is there any public comment on this? Anything online?
No online.
Okay, so we will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Looks like just about everybody. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. The next matter on certificate of appropriateness is for 407 Berkley Road. I will move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval of a certificate of appropriateness as recommended by the Historical Architectural Review Board for 407 Berkley Avenue, Haverford Station Historic District, number 22-28. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. Greg is here on this, but unless there are commissioners who wish to hear a presentation or have questions or comments, we'll just keep moving. Are there any commissioners who would have anything they'd like to know on this application? Seeing none. Okay. Is there any, sorry, Greg, is there any public comment on this application? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, raise your hand signifying aye. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item, I guess the group that left were all the future tenants on the Lancaster Avenue property. And they don't look like they drive, so we're in good shape. The next one is on page 28 of the final agenda. This is the Historical Commission applications. There are 2 items on the agenda. Before I make a motion, are there any commissioners who would like these to be considered separately? I see none. So I will move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval of the following applications as recommended by the Historical Commission at their meeting on November 28, 2022. 801 Stony Lane, Gladwyne, the Henry Foundation, Class 2, number 2022-R-24, and 330 Gypsy Lane, Wynwood, Class 2, number 2022-R-25. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any other commissioner questions, comments? Seeing none. Is there any public comment on either of these? Seeing.
One online.
Oh, someone online, okay.
Laura Dillon, and I will put her in.
Good evening, Laura Dillon, Haverford. This actually is pertaining just to the property about the Henry Foundation, and I did want to maybe relate this to some of the previous discussion. As our current code is written, I can't find any authority for the Historical Commission to recommend, nor the Board of Commissioners to require any conditions for the issuance of a building permit for this new construction on this property. The storage shed as located does not meet the township criteria for requiring a Historical Commission review at all. The Henry Foundation should never have been subject to the review process. They have been open to it, and they've been willing to accept the conditions, working in collaboration with the Historical Commission. But my concern here is process. I've not requested the actual database entry or the Historic Resource Information, HRI, sheet for this property, but it was clear from the discussion at the Historical Commission, and should be into your packet tonight, that only the main house and the barn have Historic Resource Class 2 designation and protection. And as I've suggested before, I do think that it would be appropriate to always request that staff present those HRI database sheets during these reviews. It would help to clarify which building sites, structures, and/or objects are covered. I've also spoken previously about the idea of expansive review. To be clear, according to our code, the limit of the purview of the Historical Commission, and by extension, the Board of Commissioners, is the historic resources themselves and the cultural landscape, which is defined as the minimum essential setting or context in which an identified historic resource retains its historic integrity. Minimum essential. That's not that there are reasons we have limits to our code, and this is an example of where those resource limits need to be applied. The storage shed as located is not within the minimal essential setting or context, but rather is set away and downhill from the two historic resources. For this reason, the shed should never have been considered for review by the Historical Commission. I will also note the staff's use of the term contributing elements where they mean the designated historic resources. Staff and the advisory bodies continue to try to review entire properties or parcels as though they're fully protected, I would say encumbered, and that's clearly inconsistent with our actual written code. Bad habit is not process. Process can only come from code. Please, I ask you to hold the staff and the advisory bodies to the existing standards of our municipal code. This new construction on this property does not meet the standard for requiring Historical Commission review. If we had the appropriate processes in place, any application for review based on a property address would be screened by staff for applicability based on the database HRI sheet for that property address. Construction related to an actual historic resource or within the minimal essential setting or context goes before the Historical Commission. But any construction not related to an actual historic resource nor within the minimal essential setting or context should move on to the building permit process without delay. No Historical Commission review required. This is, to me, an example of the overreach that hurts our township's historic preservation efforts. I believe there are residents who could be enthusiastic about the preservation of our township historic architecture if the processes for property owners were clear, fair, and evenly applied. The Henry Foundation is a hardworking nonprofit, a 50-acre wilderness garden that deserves support for the green space and the environmental education they provide to this community. I strongly recommend that the Building and Planning Committee dismiss this application as unnecessary, instruct the Building and Planning staff to issue the building permit without the recommended conditions, and send the Henry Foundation on their way with the apologies for the unnecessary efforts and delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gillen. Is there anyone else, Jody?
There is not.
Okay, so, and I think we already asked if anyone here had public comment. So let me, before we go, I was going to respond to Ms. Gillen, but if you'd like to say something first, Commissioner Zoll.
Commissioner Grimes, yeah, I would like to respond, and obviously others can presumably do so if they wish. I think Ms. Gillen makes a good point. It does seem like this is a burden. It's a new structure that is not adjacent, not next to the Class 2 properties. Now, if that's where it turns as to how far it is from the Class 2 properties, and maybe staff can indicate that to us. But why we would, you know, I mean, the overriding point that Our historic preservation ordinance can be burdensome, I think is valid. I think not all old structures are historic. That's a sort of a tangent. That's not the relevant issue here. We vigorously want to preserve appropriate historic structures and impose rules on historic structures that make sense. This may not. So I'd be interested in staff's point of view.
Absolutely, Commissioner Zoloff, and thank you for the question. The Historical Commission routinely reviews applications for new construction on properties that are designated historic resources. So, for example, if a property with a contributing home wishes to build a new garage adjacent to the historic home, we have the Commission review that to assess the new construction's potential impact on the historic contributing element on the property. In this case, we had a situation where the Henry Foundation constructed a building without receiving building permits.
Well, if I can just interrupt, that's a completely different issue.
It is different. It is different. But that actually, the construction of the building, it's near finished state, allowed the Historical Commission to fully assess the potential impact, visual or otherwise, on the adjacent structures on the property. I'm going to bring up an aerial view showing the location of the new structure in relation to the contributing barn, the contributing residence. So it does seem to be rather close to at least the barn, but we understood that the topography of the site made the visibility of that new structure relatively minimal. And that's really what we wanted the Historical Commission to review in this case. In the end, they did find, after a site visit and a number of meetings, that the effect really was minimal, but they had some architectural concerns. There were some engineering concerns that had to be addressed as well, and so what was constructed will need to be modified as a result of both of those reviews.
Great. Commissioner Grimes, if I could just have one follow-up question. Does the staff consider this to be adjacent to the historic structure?
Yes.
Okay. I thought it might turn on that, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else before I make a comment? Commissioner Stevenson.
Thank you. I just want to follow on Scott's questions. What is the minimum length that you consider adjacent versus not adjacent?
Well, there is no set measurement for that, but you know, no two properties are exactly alike. So what's close to a contributing element on one property could be different than another. But from this, you know, views like this aerial view that we examined before having the applicant go through the review process, we thought that there would be reason for the commission to assess that impact. And again, the topography here is, this view is deceiving. The new structure is quite a bit below the other buildings on the site. So that's the kind of thing that we wanted to confirm with site visits and things of that nature.
So the next question may be for Mr. Leswin, and that is, you know, you said earlier that there was construction without knowledge of notification. Did the township do whatever the maximum penalty is for when somebody's violating that?
I'll have to get back to you on the specifics of that, bro. I can follow up.
And my point was not for the planning, but it's that we've had these conversations a lot of times here, and that I would hope that we are implementing something to discourage folks not following the process.
We've been doing our best to do that. That's been our practice.
That was not at the township. That was more about making sure that we are letting folks know that piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions, comments? Okay.
One quickly, not to be overly technical, but there's a difference between adjacent to and adjacent in the dictionary. And adjacent just means nearby with nothing in between them. So I think in this instance, it doesn't have to be right next to or touching. And I think it's up to a body with expertise to determine contextually whether it's adjacent. And I think it really sort of makes sense to rely upon them to make that determination. And if they're off, there's a review process here. But the alternative is that the property owner is making that determination to his or her, detriment if they're wrong. So I understand Ms. Gillum's point. I don't agree with it. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'll make a comment or two. So we have a process in this township. We have a historical code that we follow, which we've discussed on other occasions and which I think some of us believe needs some updating, and hopefully that will happen before too long. This property is a Class 2. It was designated by the previous Board of Commissioners after a vetting that it had value. The township designates by address. We can have a debate as to whether that's the right way to do it, but that is the way we have done it at this point until that's changed. Within a property, there are contributing elements and there are non-contributing elements. In a situation such as this, with a Class 2 and this shed being where it is, I think it's a non-contributing, the area there is non-contributing. So my understanding is, although there's some mechanics with the way the shed is put up, that the review of it was fairly minimal. And I'm looking at, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I've more prefer a minimal review on a Class 2 property than leaving it up to a property owner to decide for themselves what ought to be brought to the township. So in this situation, I think the system worked. I don't believe that the review was burdensome. I do salute the Henry Foundation for doing the right thing after it was brought to their attention. They did that. I haven't heard, and it's in my ward, that there was any friction at all. So, I understand with Ms. Gillen that bright minds can disagree as to our process, but in this case, the process we have in place worked, and I think worked appropriately because there are landscapes, there are other parts of Class 2 properties that are important, and in this case, by going through the process, we've ensured this can go up with minimal interference to the historic fabric. So, thank you.
And I also want to acknowledge the Henry Foundation for working with us through this process, welcoming us to the property, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. So now, just to remind before we go, we've already had public comment on these, but we're going to vote on both this and the other one, which was 330 Gypsy Lane. So just want to make sure there were no other commissioner comments on that application either. Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, raise your hand signifying aye. Any opposed? Raise your hands. Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item is a resolution to authorize the appointment to the City Avenue Special Services District Board of Directors. It is on page 37 of our agendas. I am going to make a motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners adoption of a resolution to appoint Mark Brennan and reappoint Jonathan Spurgel to the Board of Directors of the City Avenue Special Services District for 5-year terms to expire January 31, 2028. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. I would note, now we'll open for Commissioner questions or comments. We do have the Executive Director of the Special Services District here, so I'll put him on the spot if we need to, but if any commissioners have questions or comments. Please, Commissioner McComb.
I would urge that we approve this, the reappointment of Jonathan Spurgel. He's a valuable contributor to the board of the City Avenue Special Services District. He's got a sort of a background in various things, including he's chairman of the board of the Montgomery County Redevelopment Authority. He's on the board of the Conservancy. He's, as I said, a valuable contributor. Mark Brennan, for an appointment, is currently Vice President of Development at Federal Realty and is the lead on the development of 121 the Bala Shopping Center, which is progressing nicely, and that's a key part of what's taking place in that part of Ward 9. So they're both really capable people, and I would urge that they be appointed and reappointed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions, comments? Seeing none, or any public comment on this? Seeing none, anyone online? Okay, great. We will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? Commissioner Zoloff, you were voting aye?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Still had it up for a while. But you're
I was
having
not
it both
voting
ways.
nay or twice.
Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda, this is a preliminary lot line change for 104 Upland Terrace and 22 Bryn Mawr Avenue in Bala-Cynwyd. I see Mr. Leswing here. Take it away.
This might be the easiest land development that's before the board this year. What we have is a lot consolidation between two properties, 22 Bryn Mawr and 104 Upland Terrace. You can see them highlighted in green and purple. You can see that the purple property has a notch let out of it. That notch was previously subdivided off of 104. 104 Upland Terrace is now it's an undersized lot, and it's non-conforming for a rear yard because that backyard was notched off in 1965 to serve as a garage. Well, the garage is gone, and what the property owners are doing is going to just transfer that property. There we go. So this is what it looks like today. And that's what it'll look like tomorrow. So the lot will just be reestablished to its original platting. It's less than 1,000 square feet that's being transferred. It's currently an old pad that was used for a garage. The garage has been demolished. The new homeowner is going to utilize this area as a garden. They're going to utilize some of the existing concrete that's there. They're going to cut it out and make a path and then build a garden around the rest of it. There are really no issues with this. It doesn't create greater subdivision. It technically requires a waiver for being a non-conforming lot because the lot is longer than it is wide. We have a provision in the subdivision code of a 2 to 2.5 to 1 ratio. But while this makes that non-conforming, it actually brings it more in conforming with setbacks, which is probably more important as part of that conforming area. Happy to answer any of your questions. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Commissioner McComb.
Quick comment. I'm very familiar with this area. It's part of my regular dog walking tour, so I go by it several times a week. As Chris pointed out, it's pretty simple. It's restoring the lot on Upland, what it originally was. It's going to benefit that property owner. We're going to get a garden rather than a concrete slab, so it's to everybody's benefit. And it's that part of the Ward 9 is the land of a regular lot, so making them sort of more coherent and the way they're supposed to be is a good thing for all. So, thank you.
Sounds like it would be good for the dog, too.
Yes, it's Zeke and Bailey.
Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Seeing none. Is there any public comment on this matter? Seeing none. Anyone online? Okay. We need a motion on the table. Since this is on your dog walking route, Commissioner McComb, would you like to make a motion?
Okay. I move that we consider for recommendation the Board of Governors approval of preliminary lot line change, plan dated August 12, 2022, last revised on November 15, 2022, prepared by Site Engineering Concepts LLC, shows the transfer of 943 square feet from 22 Bryn Mawr Avenue to 104 Upland Terrace. Plan also shows removal of 817 square feet of impervious surface at 22 Bryn Mawr Avenue and the construction of a 250 square foot paved area on 104 Upland Terrace.
Thank you, and I'll second that. Anything further? Okay, we will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, passes unanimously. Thanks. The next one is on page 53 of our agendas. This is a second stage plan for 1499 Monk Road. And since this is in my ward, I will move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval of a second stage plan for 1499 Monk Road in Gladwyne. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. Chris?
This is also very straightforward. This is just an infill second stage plan resulting from a previous subdivision that the board saw within the last year. I just put up on the screen a context map. There's been a lot of discussion about Monk Road this year. To the right is Linden Hill. That was the subject of several meetings by the Board of Commissioners for a subdivision. These are the properties right next to it. There's 3 properties that are highlighted in green, yellow, and purple. They were all under common ownership. There had been a subdivision. Some land was transferred, a house demolished, and then this lot in pink was reduced in size but still retained as a building lot. At that time of the subdivision, nothing was going forward. About a year later, the owner's coming in to build a new house. The new house is proposed to be constructed consistent with the other houses on the block. It'll just look like we're filling in the pattern of houses on either side of it regarding setbacks and general size of the house. It's approximately a 5,000 square foot house. It's very large. It's 3 stories, has a 3-car garage, plenty of stormwater management, and landscaping. One of the interesting things about this property is in the rear of it, it has a sewer easement. Sewer easement traverses the entire backyard. Most times when we see easements in backyards, they're pretty snug along the property line. This one isn't snug along the property line. It's set in a few feet from the rear property line, and there's always going to be concerns with sewer easements of someone planting over that easement. So we have conditions that some of the landscaping that was shown originally by the applicant had to be relocated away from that easement. At Monday's Planning Commission, we were looking at this as well, and we started talking to the township engineer afterwards, and we realized, well, what's to prevent somebody, if it's just grass in the future, from actually knowing where that easement is? So we're actually introducing another condition this evening that permanent survey pins shall be provided for the public utility easement. So this way there'll be survey markers and somebody knows it. This has been run by the applicant. It's acceptable. There is no relief. Staff recommends approval.
Okay, thank you. Before we take questions or comments, I'm just going to do a friendly amendment to my own motion because I neglected to include this new proposed condition of approval. So I will do a friendly amendment to include the condition. I don't know if do all commissioners have a copy of this. This is about the permanent survey pins provided for public utility easements. So, questions, comments? Yeah, sure. Oh, thank you, Commissioner Whalen. Do you have a question or a comment also?
No, just a second.
Okay. I can't see anyone online to see if there's questions or comments, so I'm going to assume the answer is no.
No.
Yep, okay. Is there any public comment on this matter? Anyone online with public comment?
No.
Okay, so we will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Right? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. The next one is items 7 and 8 on the agenda, and this is concerning the neighborhood center zoning amendment. I'm going to suggest that the explanation, we have 2 different resolutions that will have to be presented, but I'm going to suggest that Chris discuss the concepts here in one presentation, and we take commissioner questions and comments, if appropriate, on both at the same time, and then we'll handle the motion separately. So, Chris, go ahead.
Certainly. This is, what's before you tonight is for the creation of a new zoning district and then a map amendment to add properties to that zoning district. While that sounds like a really big deal, it's actually something that that was long contemplated in the comprehensive plan that just didn't make it into the zoning update. And let me take you through it and explain. We're dealing with 2 separate areas of the township that are united in their size of their commercial areas, but couldn't be probably more diverse, Penwyn and Gladwyne. So you have the Gladwyne commercial area up off of Youngsford Road, and off of Manoa Road, you have the Penwyn Village commercial area. Probably most people in the township don't know that Penwyn even has a commercial area, but these are very small areas.
blank ones?
They have very few properties. I have a little map next to them. You can see where they are. The areas that are highlighted here are to show how far away they are. And what we're creating is what we're calling a neighborhood center zoning district. In the township zoning code currently, we have three classes of zoning districts. We have village center, we have town center, and then we have regional center. When we were doing the comprehensive plan, we were actually looking at creating 4. And with the expedited time frame of preparing the zoning code, those 4 kind of got rolled into 3. But as we've been going back forward, as staff has, we've been looking at the Ardmore master plan, we've been looking at various things. And we're always looking at our commercial areas. And we've had some contact from the different civic associations. We realized that it actually makes sense to have a smaller district, a neighborhood commercial district, lower than the village center commercial district. These areas are really existing small areas that you're really trying to hope are just going to be, they're usually 1 story or 2 stories, and they're going to be adaptively repurposed. They're a little bit out of scale with the other standards that are currently in the zoning code. These districts, as you can see just illustrated, are small. These are much smaller than what you would see along any of the other roadways or any of our other commercial districts. This is Penwyn, and then this is Gladwyne. In the comprehensive plan, these areas were distinctly set aside from other areas. The comprehensive plan, the land use plan, it's a really thick document. And it took us, we were able to do the zoning code in a little over 18 months. The comprehensive plan took a little bit longer because we were very thorough going through that process. There was a lot of public involvement. There was a lot of analysis that went forward. And out of that, the land use element has different elements. It deals with residential properties. It deals with institutional properties, where we came up with institutional zoning. And it also has a very thorough commercial land use section. And in that section, the key to that is creating typologies, finding where these areas are in the township and what's their existing character and what's their desired character in the comprehensive plan. And we broke them into 4 categories. The villages, which are what these 2 areas come into. These 2 districts were the only 2 areas identified as villages. Then you had your neighborhood main streets, which are like Ballackinwood. These are Ballackinwood district, Bryn Mawr district. These are your traditional walkable areas, your traditional main streets, and then the regional center, which is City Avenue. It was based on this map, and we did a lot of breaking down of all the commercial areas. This map illustrates all the different commercial areas, and it looked at the function, the location, and the relationship of these, and identified those typologies. And from those typologies, we worked back into the zoning. And we looked at this as villages, neighborhood, traditional main streets, and the regional center. At the bottom, we have this pie chart. And the very little sliver at the top are the villages. They are almost imperceptible, and they are distinct to themselves in how much income they generate, their size, their property value. They are much different from Haverford. They are much different from Rock Hill Road. They are different from all of these areas in their scale and their function. We analyzed that for their ability, and we looked at that. And then we had this chart, and this is actually one of the really key pieces of the comprehensive plan for commercial land use, is that we divided each of the commercial areas into these typologies, and we listed them. And we went through a lot of analysis. And we looked at various functions of what's its intended use, what's its transportation network, what roadway system are they located on. And the commonalities between Penwyn and Gladwyne cause them to be linked together in this area. And from this, the recommendations were to have the zoning correspond to kind of preserving either the existing character of these or the desired intended character of these going forward. And then we looked at the service area, we looked at the commercial uses, and some of the areas going forward. And as we see this, we think we would like to come back and adjust the zoning to have these be a neighborhood commercial. And by creating this new district, it's just not, I don't think this is going to remain this way for Gladwyne and Penguin. As we're looking at Ardmore and part of the Ardmore master plan, we're looking at the Ardmore business district itself, but there are also these scattered site commercial areas. I think some people might be familiar along Spring Avenue. There's a couple along Ardmore Avenue. They're scattered site areas. Those are the kind of things that could also be fit into this new category that doesn't fit the more intensive village commercial, which isn't really all that intensive, but it is more intensive than this area. So we see that there could potentially, over time, we would build back in some of those scattered sites into this new district that we're creating. But for today, what we're seeking to do is really put Penguin and Gladwyne where they probably should have been when it came out from the recommendation of the comprehensive plan and when we created the new zoning. There's a lot of explanation of what these areas are and why they're differentiated in intensity and why they should be zoned different in the comprehensive plan. There was also a lot of public participation during the comprehensive plan, and the two areas of Gladwyne and Penguin probably had some of the most volume of participation from any of the civic associations about these areas. And there were a lot of respondents, and this is consistent with all of that desired vision that came out of the comprehensive plan. I've received a couple emails and some public comment, and I just wanted to kind of address a couple of the questions. One thing that came up several times is this spot zoning, because it's so small? They look like spots on the map. They're very small compared to other districts. Well, it's not. We referenced a go-to book that we have in our office of a book of development definitions. And spot zoning is the rezoning of a lot or parcel of land to benefit an owner for the use that is not permitted in the surrounding area, where there's no compelling reason or public benefit and where it does not further the comprehensive plan. Clearly, this furthers the comprehensive plan. This is not being done for the benefit of an owner. This is really just implementing the comprehensive plan. So it's not really spot zoning. And it's not exclusionary zoning, in that the development regulations don't result in the exclusion of lower, moderate income and minority families in the community. It's just zoning the appropriate scale for these areas. That's really what it is. I think there's been a lot of emails I've had that have read a lot more into it. It's really, if we had longer process for the rezoning, we probably would have included this. But we didn't, and now we're having the chance to go back and fix them. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you. Sure. I get choked up talking about comprehensive plan. Good times. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, okay, great.
Josh Gilda has her hand.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gilda Kramer.
Are there houses taller than 2 stories in the neighborhoods surrounding these little business districts?
Some of the residential properties are higher. That's a good question. I would have to get back to the details of that. But they're all generally, I think some of the houses in Gladwyne are probably higher than than the height of the existing buildings in the commercial district. I think that's fair to say.
Are some of the houses in Gladwyne zoned for 3 stories or 2.5 stories?
They are.
And are some of the houses zoned in the Penguin area for 3 stories or 2.5 stories?
They are.
So what is the rationale then for limiting a commercial district surrounded by taller houses to only 2 stories?
I think one of the things is when we approach the comprehensive plan, we called this a comprehensive plan for preservation, infill, and redevelopment. So we had different growth strategies, and the comprehensive plan identified where growth should go and also where growth shouldn't go or where growth should be moderated. And in this case, we're looking at this as somewhat of a preservation strategy for the commercial areas. It seems to be that it would be more appropriate for the revitalization and continued vitalization of these areas to be in the existing buildings and structures and not see, I think, what we've seen across the township of somebody coming in and building an entirely new redevelopment. These aren't necessarily areas that would really warrant that because of their scale and their relationship to the surrounding land use. They're kind of nestled and they've grown up with the surrounding houses around them.
Okay, Commissioner Kramer, anything else?
No, I just simply don't see the rationale for differentiating these two neighborhoods in this way. And that's my concern. And I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Chris, thank you for the presentation. It's good to get some of the history on this since it seems like these conversations started and ended before I got here. I'm not sure I agree with you that if we had spent more time on the zoning code, we would have gotten to this. But I mean, I guess we could have spent a lot of time. So I want to dig into some of the questions from my email. So apologies for the repeat, but we have a village center zoning. The intention is for our commercial villages, right? And we had discussed at one point the potential of lowering the height of VC across the board and using a third story as an incentive the same way that we do with TC1 with the fourth story. And can you tell me why we didn't do that? Or why that was rejected outright as part of the VC zoning in the first place?
Correct. These are distinctly different areas. Just because you have letters after them, VC, NC, the physical areas of Gladwyne Village and Penguin Village are much different from the areas that became zoned village commercial. A village commercial zoning would include Montgomery Avenue, the Montgomery Avenue Business District through there. There are parts of Haverford that are zoned VC. Many of those have three-story buildings. I think that was traditional architecture of that area. So there's an existing pattern to those. And I think we wanted to keep it at that. There was concern that some of those areas that have VC have properties that should be redeveloped. As I mentioned, different strategies, right? We have areas that we clearly want to preserve older buildings, right? Older architecture in the township. We want to see that adaptively reused. As a community, we know how to do that. There are things that were built in the 50s and the 60s that are reaching the end of their design life that are not desirable buildings, right? If they go, we would like to be able to, I think it would be in the community's interest, much like we talked earlier about just that infill in the back of that parking lot, that if a building was torn down, you could get a better streetscape, you could get stormwater management, you could get greening, those things that weren't put in when those buildings were originally done. And we would like to leave ourselves that flexibility to improve our community by doing that, because that redevelopment would be in the community's interest. All development isn't bad. Development in the right spot is good, and we try to be very fine-grained, I think, in our approach to this, to try to channel development where it should go and where it shouldn't go. So allowing that flexibility in the VC district with the areas that we zoned that way, we wanted to leave that ability to change. Some of those buildings should change.
Okay. So in recent presentations regarding the Ardmore master plan, there has been the suggestion that we should increase height in certain parts of Ardmore, and that a failure to do so would limit the redevelopment opportunity, right? And so I assume that the same holds true in these two locations, that by reducing the height, we are effectively erasing redevelopment opportunity in these two spots. Is that right?
What marginal redevelopment ability there is? You would have to, in these districts, you would have to assemble a lot of property to do it. You would almost wipe out. You would almost have big projects that, if you did redevelopment, would almost be the entire district. Like Penguin, that would be a complete redevelopment of that property. And I don't think that anyone in Penguin would want to just see a new district, like a new building that was put there. I think they'd rather live with what they have now. In Ardmore, I think you're correct. There's what you're referring to. Not all, I don't think all commissioners have been there. There were preliminary recommendations that were released by the consultant, and in that they've done an analysis of the zoning for Ardmore, and they've looked at it and said that our existing zoning of three stories doesn't provide any economic initiative to redevelop the property because of the land costs, the cost of development in the township, our requirements for stormwater management, our architectural requirements, the length of time it takes to get something approved. Nothing's going to happen, right? So we could have something at 3 stories, it's not going to happen. The Ardmore plan is looking at, it's following a very similar procedure of there are areas to be preserved that should not be changed. But the areas that we're targeting along Lancaster Avenue, I think many of us, if we walk out here or drive home, will look and see that there are properties and older shopping centers or car dealerships that could be changed. What would it take to transform that, right? If we wanted to have a building that had a modern streetscape, that you could walk safely down the street, not out in the curb because there were cars pushing you out there, what would it take to do that? And the consultant there said that it's 4 stories or more because of the economics of that it would take to do that. So that's where they were saying. But part of that, by keeping some of the zoning lower, what I'm thinking, and we're trying to find strategies with the consultant when it comes forward, that we would be able to target properties, larger properties, that are suitable for redevelopment, right? The properties that we want to see change, that we need stormwater management, we need better streetscaping, and also having that it took other properties out of it and preserved those properties. There's different strategies to do that. We don't want to throw all properties into that, and there's properties that should just be adaptively reused, and that takes a lot of different skill sets. And with adaptive reuse, it doesn't just mean leave it. There will be other strategies from the township, perhaps by investing in facades, right? Taking what we're seeing, the success of the Ardmore Historic District.
One of the strategies we used in the zoning code was when a property was abutting a residential district zone, we would step back the 3rd story. Why is that not sufficient here?
The analysis of looking at of many of the properties in these areas, if you look at them, they rely on public parking. There's not a lot of parking in those areas. There's just not a lot of capacity in those districts to absorb a lot of that additional development. It's a strategy that could go if the community was so inclined to be encouraging development in some of those areas that we wanted to transform them. Yes, I think that would be an appropriate strategy. In some cases, as I'm indicating, there are areas that we want to preserve as the form that we like the form that it is now. Like Gladwyne Village, people in Gladwyne say they like the form of that. They can walk where they can walk. That's what they're doing. Same with Penn Wynn. It's not worth the wholesale transformation of that.
I guess that's what puzzles me a little bit, because I look at this like half block of Penn Wynn, and it looks like an old strip mall, a building that we wouldn't necessarily want to preserve, that we would like to see something newer there. Maybe I know we don't want to see like a 4 or 5 story apartment building, but I would think we would want to see a new improved building with a better streetscape and better amenities. And in Gladwyne Village, it's cute, it's quaint, but it's not active, it's not vibrant. There are businesses that are closing down. There's a grocery store chain that decided they couldn't operate there. What is our criteria for deciding when we think it's worthy of preservation versus when we think redevelopment would provide greater opportunity?
Well, and some of it is, it's also the location. Our other commercial areas are primarily located on busier roads, and they have they serve more of the township. These 2 areas that we put in, and as I mentioned, there could potentially be other scattered sites that could be consolidated back into this district as we move forward. There are areas that are very neighborhood oriented, right? And I would say Gladwyne Village is neighborhood oriented. Gladwyne Village is not necessarily, it's out of the way. You'd have to really go out of your way to go there. Same with Penn Wynn. Gladwyne Village is a historic district, so it has a lot of architectural charm and character to it because it's been designated as a historic district. Penguin is it's the scale of what is developed around, and it's fit into that. I think it's more its architectural character is one of the reasons why you would want to preserve it, and then it's also just the form of how it's related to and developed along with this neighborhood.
All right, I mean, I don't know. I don't agree with you that Gladwyne Village is out of the way. I drive through there every time I go to the expressway. That's my route. It's also one of the only hardware stores left in the township.
That's true.
You would think we would want to support that business. But that's the end of my questions. So thank you, Commissioner Grimes.
Sure, thank you. Other? Would you care to enlighten us with your comments? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I would be happy to ask my questions too.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lesswing, I know. Thank you for you covered some of the things that I emailed you. So my question, I guess, would be kind of as a follow-up to Commissioner Courtney's, is that as you laid out this for this neighborhood and thank you for the explanation about why the historical piece on that, then why wouldn't we just look to expand this and make it a blanket across the board for temperate this kind of stuff?
Because not all districts are the same. They have different service areas, they have different functions. In the township, we need to eat, we need to drink, we need to buy things. There are different areas that have public transportation that are better suited to public transportation for employees to come and go. There are areas that have higher density around them with their neighborhoods. So each of these areas has a character that developed around, like the ones along the main line. Those were traditional things that towns that service the homes that developed in response to the commuter rail that was there. These are both rather suburban, auto-oriented areas that just kind of developed as a convenience within their areas themselves. And as a community, we want to take planning of our commercial areas and have them vibrant and make sure that they work. Taking everything down to 2 stories wouldn't necessarily be consistent or good for the community. It would probably take a lot of the air out of the steam of the community, because we need commercial areas. Now, Lower Merion, it's primarily a residential area, but we still need to eat and drink, and we want to make sure that we have some place to go and do that, or to buy something. We'd like more, certainly like to have more hardware stores. We'd like to have some more of those services. They're necessary things.
And you would also agree that this is a neighborhood, so that these folks over there like to eat and have services as well. And if they had the zoning that allowed them to have those services convenience, then that would make sense too, right? Because we want this to be, we're very big on minimizing transportation, and so if we have it in a neighborhood, then they wouldn't have to drive all the way to Ardmore. They can just walk into their village.
There's different patterns, but I understand where you're going.
All right, is this comment time?
Please.
But again, I want to thank Chris for the presentation. I want to start off by saying that I envy and I appreciate this Penguin Civic and the Gladwyne Civic, because what they have done is they've put something in place that I have failed to do for the last 5 years, and that is put something in place to minimize development in their neighborhoods. And so my piece on this is not because there's this perception that it is against what they're doing. I think they did an excellent job to preserve their neighborhood. And I think they did an excellent job to ensure that their neighborhood maintains the character that they wanted to preserve. And I think that is the whole purpose when you talk about the history of zoning. The whole history of zoning, particularly in the suburban area, came out to the exclusionary zoning piece was to, when people moved out the urban areas into places like Lower Merion, what they did is create the zones that we have, exclusionary zoning, to ensure that they didn't become overridden with too much commercial, too much expanded development, and to maintain the suburban character. And what they did was an excellent piece, and I want to commend them for that. But what I am saying is, we must figure out to have the same kind of model in which Chris appropriately said that we have to be able to have appropriate places to eat, commercial for businesses, but I think we need to rethink about how it's being done. And are we doing it in other neighborhoods too excessively? I don't have the answer how we do it. However, I think that if this is something that's coming forward that we think is important enough for this neighborhood, then I would hope that we use the same model across the board in Lower Merion. So thank you for your time. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other Commissioner McComb, please.
Quick comment. Chris, I want to thank you for your presentation, because I think it really gives some substance that doesn't emerge from the memo. And with all due respect to Commissioner Court and Commissioner Stevenson, I think the township, and looking at our comprehensive plan, I think we're big enough to have all sorts of different things in the township. And while somebody suggested the strip in Penn Wynn isn't really that much, it's kind of neat. It's quirky, and it's something that's walkable. And believe it or not, it's something that we would love to have on Battle Avenue, which we don't have. So we have something there that works. Gladwyne Village is charming, you know, and it's small, and it's not shiny and new, but it works. And I think we have plenty of shiny and new. We have plenty of development. You know, we're fine, for example, we have mixed use, but we're building on parking lots. We're not taking down something that essentially works. So not everything has to be an opportunity to make it, you know, new and shiny. And, you know, my personal gripe is the country's become so homogenized that every place is like every other place. Let's preserve something that's kind of interesting and small town in Pennsylvania, and people like it. And they're tiny. They're not going to disrupt our housing supply. They're not going to disrupt economic opportunity, but they benefit the neighborhoods where they live. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Commissioner Zeloff.
Thanks, Commissioner Grimes. To me, a lot of this is about transit-oriented development. Our business districts are generally on train stops in the train line, and that's where business districts and density make sense. These two locations are not on the train lines. They're not transit-oriented development. They are the unique villages that Commissioner McComb just described quite well. And that's evidenced by the number of parcels. You read the memo, there's only 13 parcels in Gladwyne and 11 in Penn Wynn. I mean, these are as small as they could be to be even considered commercial areas. I think this zoning makes sense.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Neill.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Grimes. And I want to also just echo the points made by Commissioner McComb and Commissioner Zeloff with respect to both the VC districts that are proposed here as neighborhood commercial. I've had the opportunity to live really in both places, so I've been able to walk around Penn Wynn and really absorb what that neighborhood is. I can tell you with certainty that, and of course I'll defer to Commissioner Churchill on this, but Penn Wynn is Penn Wynn because of how it is formed at this point. And I would never feel comfortable even beginning to say that something bigger, better, shinier would be appropriate there, because that's, you know, if I didn't live there, I couldn't say that. But having lived there, I feel somewhat comfortable saying that. And Gladwyne really is, it is what it has to be for what it is. It's a beautiful, historic place that really doesn't exist in many places, and nationally, actually. And if you consider places like Lenox and other places in New England, we're close to it, and there are just not that many places in the Northeast left like that anymore. So I think that the zoning is appropriate for two-story max for Gladwyne, considering its size and what it is. So I'm strongly in support of this ordinance going through. So thank you.
Thank you. So I'm saving Commissioner Bernheim for next to last here.
Clean up.
President Sinai, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you.
Just don't want Commissioner Bernheim to think I'm ignoring him.
That's okay too, you know.
Trust me, I'm used to it.
Okay. So much to say. I mean, so first, I mean, just a little bit of context about how we got here, right? I mean, so we did this zoning code, and part of the things that our consultant DPZ did was to say, let's take these myriad different categories we have and distill them down to fewer. And this is probably a case where we distilled them down to one fewer than we probably should have had. It seems like we should have a neighborhood center in our code, and then the question is where it applies to. And I concur with Commissioner Stevenson that I would like to see going forward, like other places that might actually fit in this. We did the comp. The world's very different when we did the comp plan, right? I understand that our areas have grown up around transit-oriented development. Transit in the Philadelphia metropolitan area is hub and spoke down to Center City. And guess what? 40% of buildings are occupied. People are not commuting into Center City for work anymore. It's going to change the calculation around transit or development, and it's going to say it's more about people staying, kind of around in place and being able to serve the people who are in place. But there's an economic reality, which is not every place can serve the people around it. We just don't have enough sort of density in the township, and you can't proliferate our downtown areas. And I'm a broken record on this, which is I keep saying we have too much of this stuff. And really, we should have the default being this kind of two-story development, and we increase it in the places, we increase it with the scalpel in the places we're going to be strategic to have the impact. Because we can probably only support a few nodes, right? We can support a Bryn Mawr node, we can support an Ardmore node, we can support a Ballackinwood Regional Center node. In all the other places, anytime we start doing extra of this stuff, we're just taking gravity away from the places our residents are going to want to be able to be, right? And so we need to concentrate. And so that's an argument for doing this. And as Commissioner Stevenson said, thinking about doing this in more places. If not this, the same sort of exercise, a little bit of reduction. If we get it wrong, it's certainly easy enough to go back up. Right? We've found that it's hard to rewind it. Why the two-story? I am sympathetic to the notion that people care about what their built environment looks like, and it's part of their quality of life. When we did the zoning, we kept holding up, the kind of historic part of Chestnut Hill as like, this looks really great. Why can't we have that? Why do we have more than that? That's 2.5 stories with gables, right? The half story is gables. That's what that looks like. It is an appealing small area, right? It doesn't work for a bigger area, but it's an appealing small area, and it's probably the form that we would like to get to in some of these places. In Chestnut Hill, the houses around it are taller than that, right? But when you're walking down a street of it, it feels natural, has a rhythm to it, it has a human scale. And that's the kind of thing that we should be paying attention to in our design. We should be doing this more. We should be doing this more, right? The issue that I think we have is that we're only doing this in 23 parcels, right? The other thing that I'll say is that I think it is more than just the commercial, right? I mean, I think one of the things I'm hearing from residents in Ward 12 is that infill development in residential is also out of scale. But the new zoning code tried to get it in scale and contextual to the neighborhood, and we missed the target there too, right? This is the kind of thing that I think we should be doing more of and paying attention to as we edit and adapt the zoning code. So yeah, I think this is a fine thing to do. But I think it is just a symptom of like these are big issue things that we should be thinking about, and I could not concur more with what Commissioner Stevenson said, which is not every place needs to be big, right? In most places probably should not be. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McKeon.
Thank you. I agree with this position that not everything needs to be big. And having grown up in the 1980s in Penguin, I probably spent just about every day I was up at the Penguin Shopping Center for one thing or another, because there were 2 pharmacies there. The one pharmacy had a soda fountain, so that would attract the kids coming there after school. There was a hardware store owned by a former commissioner, and there was a lot of things to do. And it's a very modest neighborhood, I think, with modest homes. These are modest, sort of small town stores, and I think they fit in very well with that community. And it's really for a lot of members of the community to walk there, to bike there. It's not necessarily meant to attract huge throngs of people, and I think it's very important for the community, and that's why I think the zoning that we're putting through makes a lot of sense, and it's a very good fit. But the takeaway from that is that, as Commissioner Stevenson and some others have said, this is a really good model, and it's a shame we can't have more of this. And I think if there were opportunities to emulate it more in Ardmore or places like that, it would be great for the community, because as it is, it's so modest. It really doesn't get in anyone's way, and I think it sets the model in a lot of ways.
Thank you. And I'm going to make some comments so I can then leave to Commissioner Bernhardt.
I think you have
Oh,
Commissioner
someone
Sean
else
Kramer
here?
first.
I'm sorry.
No.
I hadn't seen any hands.
No.
Well, you got a minute to change your mind, because I'll take a minute. So I'm tempted to just say what they all said, the people who are in favor of this. I would only add, from my perspective, in speaking about the Gladwyne neighborhood center itself specifically, I see this as really codifying what was appropriate, and I mean that in two ways. One is that the Gladwyne area is a historic district, and it became apparent when we were considering, or when a developer bought the Acme property and had been put a proposal to put some residential units there that were going to be much higher than what's there now. It became apparent that that was out of character for Gladwyne Village and the historic character of Gladwyne Village, and that a two-story max was much more appropriate. And and that's what these changes reflect. I also would say, just to further respond to what others have said, this was a very community-driven process, I think, in both places. And the people in Gladwyne knew what they felt was appropriate for their district, and they pushed for it. And I think that that certainly others in other parts of the township are welcome to do that too. But I see this as just, I had told the Gladwyne people when they were discussing the Acme site, or I should now call it the McCaffrey site, that I felt that the historic district laws were strong enough to limit that development to 2 stories. And I still believe that today, because more would be out of character. But what we may do tonight, what I'm hoping we'll do tonight, makes the process a lot easier, because it gives a property owner more certainty about what they can do, and also gives the neighborhood comfort that they don't have to keep fighting these battles in the small area that will become part of these neighborhood centers, either in Gladwyne or Penwyn. So, Commissioner Bernhardt.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Grimes. And one of the advantages of going last is you could say, well, everybody's covered the things that I was going to state, and pretend that I'm as thoughtful and articulate as my colleagues in their commentary. But the only thing I'd like to add from what's been stated is that, as Chris pointed out, this was something that was discussed during the comprehensive plan. There are only a few of us who were left on the board that were here at the time, and that, focused upon these areas as if they were set apart because they are small and tiny, and different in their nature than elsewhere. The idea of looking as to whether there are other portions of the community that are similar and then would have similar type of zoning makes a whole lot of sense. But what occurred is that when we did the code and condensed things, that the village center or VC district, within the code, we had an explanation that said the VC districts are the small commercial areas that function as neighborhood or village centers, generally compact, walkable in scale, with local retail and occasional residential uses above the first floor. Some of those thought, all right, retail, the next floor, but occasional residential, not much. That created more confusion, as we found out when there were issues regarding the Acme site, which was building some very high-end condominiums, crunching them into that small area. And to the credit of what was the developer, he recognized this really wasn't what the community wanted, and to the credit of the community, they found McCafferty's who said, look, we believe if we build it, they will come. And maybe a little bit different than Acme, that has another store that's not too far away, they will have learned from the mistakes of that grocery, build something, and indeed it makes a walkable area. And this helps preserve the village, that very small area of Gladwyne, which is, I don't believe there's one building there above 2 stories. And some, I think, are just 1 story, if recollection serves. And then surrounding that, there's smaller little homes, and you have to branch out before they get a little bit larger. Penwyn has got something similar, but it's even a smaller area. So this fits back to the comp plan for these 2 areas. And whether this paradigm fits elsewhere certainly ought to be examined. There's no reason not to, but here we are now, and if this is establishing a methodology for other examination in the code, which we were, I almost was going to say warned, but that doesn't sound right, which we were advised would be something that we would be making adjustments as we live with the code as time goes on, then this is a good start. And then just the last thing, the civic associations worked with our building and planning department for a long time. There were a number of iterations of this that went back and forth with a lot of dialogue of how to try to make this so it worked for, for these particular areas, with the concept of creating a new neighborhood center, and as Chris pointed out, that can be utilized elsewhere. So I hope everybody will vote for this, and we'll see next time it rolls around in what appropriate area. So thank you very much, Commissioner Grimes, and it's so unique to get the last word in anything. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bernheim, by any chance would you like to make a motion?
Well, if you insist. Yeah, I make a motion to consider for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise a public hearing and notice of intent to adopt an ordinance to amend the Code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 155, entitled Zoning, Article 4, District-Specific Standards, Section 155-4.3, Commercial Center, VC and DC districts, and Article 5, Uses, Section 155-5.7, Zoning Permits, to effectively establish and regulate a new neighborhood center zoning district.
Thank you. Was there a set? Commissioner O'Neill is seconding this. Thank you. Any other additional commissioner questions, comments on this? Okay. We do have public comment. We received 3 written. Well, actually, let's go first. Is there any in-person public comment? Please, sir, come right up. If you would identify yourself, and we generally ask for about 3 minutes of comments.
It won't take 3 minutes. Thank you. My name is Mike Daly. I'm a resident of Gladwyne. I'm newly minted co-president of our civic association, so I just wanted to say a couple of things very quickly. First, we wanted to note for the record, although I think it's been said already, that we very enthusiastically, to the surprise of I think no one, support the proposal this evening. We also wanted to note our appreciation to staff for their leadership on this issue and their willingness to go back and look at the zoning code and whether it captures what was envisioned by the comprehensive plan. I had a lot of other things I was going to say. They've all been said, so I'll skip those and just respond to 3 things I heard. Yeah, it's true that Gladwyne is maybe not as vibrant as it was 3-4 years ago when we had the Acme. That's true. But we're very happy that we're having McCaffrey's coming. They were willing to build in that spot, and we're very looking forward to having them there in the coming year. There were questions about what is better for these communities. I think it's notable and important that both of the community civic associations support this proposal. It's true of Gladwyne, and it's also true of Penwyn. And there was a question by one of the commissioners about whether there are large houses in Gladwyne and Penwyn. Yeah, there are. I mean, it's true also of Chestnut Hill, as one of the commissioners noted. There are large houses in Gladwyne for sure, but Gladwyne is somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of the square footage of the township. There are some large homes in Gladwyne, but none of them are near the village center, which I hope will soon be a neighborhood center. So I don't think there should be concerns there. With that, I'll I'll close and thank you all for your attention tonight.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment in person? Is there anyone online?
No one online has their hands raised.
Okay, so we received 3 written comments. One from the Ardmore Progressive Civic Association from Micah Sneed, who wrote inquiring about reasons for the proposed zoning amendment, the status of an affordable housing plan for the township, and asked for an extension of time for the public to learn about and provide input on this proposed zoning amendment. We also received a written comment from the Gladwyne Civic Association in support of the zoning amendment, and also written comments from Penn Civic Association in support of the proposed zoning amendment. Are there any commissioners who wish to respond to any of the public comment? Okay.
I would.
Oh, I'm sorry, please.
I appreciate Mr. Sneed's comments, and I hate to be the fly in the ointment here, but I think it is a valid question, you know, to ask whether we need more time to consider this. I totally respect that the Gladwyne and Penn Civics support this, and the commissioners in those wards support this. At the same time, I will take responsibility for this. I don't know that I understand the impact of future potential affordable housing development in these areas if we pass this. You know, we know that density, right? That affordable housing needs density, and we know that a lot of neighborhoods don't want density for sometimes for that very same reason. And I just have a concern that voting yes on this right now for me would be remiss, because I don't know that I've really fully been able to appreciate the impact of this on affordable housing development and in those neighborhoods if the need were to arise. Furthermore, I think that, you know, I'm kind of trying to understand why the market can't decide why we, you know, whether a third floor is necessary or not in a given building. Like, I don't know that a developer would build a third floor if they didn't need it, if the market didn't dictate that it would be profitable. So I don't know that I really understand why this is necessary. That's all. So to Mr. Sneed's comment, I would appreciate more time to consider the impact of this on affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Are there other? Commissioner Courtney.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I also wanted to address Mr. Sneed's comment. I think Chris said that this is not exclusionary zoning, and it's not, I guess, explicitly exclusionary, but we are effectively removing the potential for the size of development that would create moderate income housing. I came in here tonight intending to vote against this, but I think I've changed my mind, at least to advertise, to allow us to have some time to evaluate this, in the hope that this zoning designation can be applied to the areas of Wynwood, Ardmore, Haverford, where many of our constituents would like to see this kind of limitation on redevelopment. This was something that was discussed a lot in the North Ardmore Civic, the Wynwood Civic, the Haverford Civic during zoning. If we're going to have this designation, I'm going to be optimistic and I'm going to support it moving forward in the hope that staff will follow up, will look into these other regions that weren't necessarily called out in the comp plan, but are analogous to Gladwyne Village and this section of Penguin in terms of the surrounding neighborhood and in terms of, frankly, the residents' desire, which is weighing heavily on this decision, to keep the nearby neighborhood commercial district small and adaptively reused. Thanks.
Okay.
I just want to say ditto to what Mr. Courtney said, because I know you're trying to get out here before 8 o'clock.
Okay, so let me just make some responsive comments before we vote. I heard what you said there, don't worry about the timing. You know, I would ask people, first of all, we are advertising this tonight. You're correct that we will have other time for discussion. But I would ask that people understand or consider what we're actually considering here. This is 13 properties in Gladwyne Village, one of which, if you consider it one, is the McCaffrey Supermarket, which is not likely to become any sort of housing anytime soon. I believe the church is there, and other, it's all, as Commissioner Bernheim said, I think it's all commercial buildings in the historic district. In Penwyn, it's all, I don't see a number here on the number of buildings. Oh, it's 11 properties. So it's not a large number. And what we're essentially doing in large part is, at least in Gladwyne, I believe in Penwyn also, is reducing the number of stories from 3 to 2. It's not like this was ever going, these were ever zoned for, excuse me, before we did the 2020 zoning code amendments, I believe you could have put a much higher building, at least in the Gladwyne area, but certainly not since we all voted to change the zoning in 2020 could you even do, you could do 3 stories there, which now is becoming 2. So this really is not a particularly dramatic change from the perspective of what kind of housing might have gone in there or might go in there if we don't pass this. So while I think the discussion is certainly a valid one, and I think many of us have said on occasions we look forward to dramatically improving the way we approach affordable housing in this township, I don't know that this is an impediment to that. So anyone else? So we're going to do the first of the votes and then we'll take the next one. This is on Commissioner Bernheim's motion. All those in favor?
You did have 2 other write-in comments, if I recall.
I mentioned the 3, didn't I? I got the 3.
My bad.
I'm happy to read them all for everyone.
No.
Okay, so we'll call the vote. All those in favor, raise your hand signifying aye. Opposed? I see 2 opposed, okay? But the motion carries. The next motion is on page 87 of our agendas. Do you want to make this motion?
Yes.
Commissioner Churchill, I'll call on Commissioner Churchill.
Thank you. It's very similar to the motion that we just passed. Consider for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise a public hearing and notice of intent to adopt an ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion.
It's this one. You're right so far.
Good. Chapter 155, entitled Zoning, by the adoption of a zoning map which rezones certain parcels contained in the Village Center zoning district to create a new neighborhood center district.
I will second that. Thank you, Commissioner Churchill. Are there any commissioners who wish to comment on this motion? I see none. Is there any public comment on this motion? Anyone online? I see none, so we will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? So the motion carries with 2 no votes. Okay.
May I make a comment?
Please.
I just wanted to thank the Gladwyne Civic and the Penwyn Civic for all the work that they did in working with Chris in really putting this advertising ordinance together. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I guess, President Sinai, that concludes the business of the Building and Planning Committee
Thank
tonight.
you, Commissioner Grimes, and that concludes the business of Lower Merion Board of Commissioners for this evening.